Good afternoon. My name is Eric Woodard. I'm Director of Fellowships and Internships at the Smithsonian Institution, and I'd like to welcome you to our Here to Career series. Today we're talking to a group of guys that I know pretty well. They're all super smart. These guys are legit. I mean, this is in terms of science. This is where rubber meets the road. And I'll let our distinguished panel members introduce themselves in just a minute. We're talking about conservation and genomics. I have to let these guys explain because they can explain it much better than I can. But if you're joining us today as a repeat customer, or if this is your first time, we're so glad you did. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, we're so glad you have. So the way this will work is we'll ask our panel members to introduce themselves and just tell a little bit about their careers. And guys, I just gotta be honest with you, these guys' stories are really interesting. So I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. And then we'll open it up to questions. And as you may know, questions pile up quick. So if, as our panel members start talking, you have a question, definitely go ahead and ask it because you'll be in the front of the line. And there's a good chance we'll make you live on the air so you can ask your question. But without any further ado, I'd like to kick it off and we'll ask our panel members to introduce themselves and we'll start with Owen. Owen, if you would, what's your story, man?
Hello, everybody. So my name is Owen McMillan and I'm joining you from Panama. So my backdrop is actually the Chagas River, which is the river that was dammed to form the Panama Canal. So I'm a scientist at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. It's been operating in Panama for the last 100 years. So I serve a dual role down here. So I'm not only a scientist interested in genetic and genomic variation, I'll talk a little bit about that, but I'm also the academic dean. So I'm in charge of our academic program, which includes lots of interns, lots of graduate students, lots of postdoc, people that come to Panama to do science. So Eric asked me to sort of give you my sort of story in a nutshell. And I guess, and he also said that most of you guys are sort of college students, sort of roughly 20 years old, trying to figure out what you want to do with your life. And I can go back and I can actually remember quite well the great epiphany that I had when I was roughly your age, when I was trying to figure out, what I wanted to do for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And that great epiphany was that I wanted to be a marine biologist. So I decided I wanted to be a marine biologist. I had no idea what that meant, but I did do an internship at the University of North Carolina's Marine Lab, and I learned two things there. So first, I learned that marine biology is huge. It's a huge field. And secondly, I learned that I wasn't really built to sort and identify plankton. It was just far too complicated for me. And that sort of got me interested in genetics, which of course is just very simple 4-letter code. And after that, I continued to I went to another internship, went to graduate school at the University of Hawaii, where I worked on butterfly fish. I'm generally interested in variation, particularly the variation that distinguishes individuals from one another, and what that variation is used for. So I did my PhD research on color patterns in butterfly fishes. Great PhD. I was a marine biologist. And then I realized that my third sort of great realization is that there are particular questions that demand that you think a lot about what type of organisms that you work on. And I moved from butterfly fishes to butterflies for my postdoc, and I've been doing a lot of work on how you generate a pattern on a butterfly wing for the last 20 or 30 years. And during that time, genetics has really grown from, where we had so little data to where now we get massive amounts of data. I mean, my data set that I did for my PhD, fits on a small Excel sheet. We're generating, millions and billions of base pairs for, just a small study. So the technology's really changed. At the same time, the types of questions that you can answer and ask have also changed, and it's gotten to be a lot more exciting. So I continue to work in genetics and genomics. I'm continually interested in the variation that we see amongst organisms and the genetic basis of that variation. That's my story in a nutshell.
That's awesome. It's very inspiring. I like butterfly fishes to butterflies. That's awesome. Hey, Zeus, lay it on us, man. What's your story?
My story. Well, okay. Well, first of all, my name is Zeus Maldonado. I am a research geneticist at the Center for Conservation Genomics at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute at the National Zoo. I've been a research geneticist there for 21 years. My emphasis really is on conservation and evolutionary genetics of mammals in particular, and I study a wide range of mammals. Our program, like Owen's program, is academic, very formed by mostly undergraduate students, interns, graduate students, and postdocs who are the real wizards and magicians in our lab, because they're the ones that bring in the new ideas, the new technologies, and the passion, and that keeps us going. And so my story was a little bit more crooked than Owen's. I was born and raised in Mexico City. I came to the United States and enrolled in a small state university in Pennsylvania, where they had a nice small museum collection where I conducted several internships and volunteer for the museum, and that's where I learned a lot about mammal diversity and collections and the importance of collections and how to conduct fieldwork as an undergraduate. And that allowed me, actually, because I became more knowledgeable about collections, to get a master's degree there as well as a curatorial assistant for the museum. And then I finished that, and because I had all that experience, I was then hired at the LA County Museum of Natural History in the Division of Mammals as a curatorial assistant for 3 years, where I also learned a lot about the diversity taxonomy of California mammals. And at that time, it was when conservation genetics was starting, and there was a lab at UCLA headed by Dr. Robert Wayne that was just starting to do PCR and all these magical things, like Eric says. And I enrolled in the PhD program there. I got a lot of experience in conservation genetics, particularly of small mammals, but because there was a large group of postdocs and students there from all over the world, I also got involved in several projects with mammals in different parts of the world. But the one thing about my experience at UCLA was that I was also very aware of minority underrepresentation. At UCLA, which is in California, you would expect that they would have a lot of Latino students, but they didn't. And so I was very involved in minority outreach, and I think that kind of contributed to my getting the job here at the Smithsonian, because when I was finishing my PhD, there was a position that was opening for somebody to do conservation genetics and minority outreach programs. And so it fit perfectly for what I was trained to do. So, 21 years ago, I applied and got that position. And so here I am.
That's awesome. And Jesus, we're so glad you did apply and you did get that position, especially. Mike, I know you're just lay it on us, man. What is your story?
Well, my story's longer in terms of years than these other guys. You can see I'm a few years older than they are, but I'll try to keep it in a nutshell. I've been motivated, inspired, by the natural world since I was a small child. I grew up in Texas, in Houston, chasing butterflies first, and Owen's got the best of me on that now. But then, my interest shifted to fish and snakes and turtles and finally birds. And so ultimately I do work on birds now. And let me back up and say, my name is Mike Braun. I work at the Museum of Natural History in the Department of Vertebrate Zoology here in Washington. And I use genetic tools to study mainly the evolutionary diversity of birds, both the diversity of all birds across all living birds across the world and their relationships, but also how new diversity arises, how new species of birds arise in nature. So back to my childhood, growing up in Houston, I had opportunities early on to get exposed to science, both at NASA. You'll know that there's a big NASA facility, manned spacecraft facility near Houston, and then also at the Texas Medical Center. And those experiences helped me understand by the time I was in high school that genetics was going to be an important tool to use to understand diversity, to understand the natural world and biodiversity and all the things that really enthralled me when I was outdoors and out in the woods, you know. And so I went to college and studied genetics and biochemistry, not because I was interested in that, but because I thought it'd be an important tool. Went to graduate school, was able to combine that genetics interest or focus with studies of bird speciation. But then, you know, when I was, I also wanted to say that I actually started graduate school. All of you now, I'm sure, think of genetic work being done at the DNA level. But when I started college, people didn't actually even believe that it would even be possible to sequence DNA in the mid-70s. But in 1977, the same year that I started graduate school, the first two methods were published for how to sequence DNA. And so you could see that, that ultimately we would get to the DNA level in evolutionary studies. And so I've been able over my career to advance from studies of proteins and simple studies of nucleic acids to the kinds of massive DNA sequencing studies that Owen mentioned and that we all do nowadays. So, but when I was through with my PhD and looking for a postdoc, there was no one doing evolutionary genetic studies at the nucleic acid level. So I ended up working in cancer and AIDS research for a number of years at the National Cancer Institute, where actually Jesus's mentor that he mentioned, Bob Wayne, was a graduate student at the same time.
That's right. Yeah.
When I was a postdoc, working in a lab that had interest in evolutionary genetics. And then from there, so I worked on cancer and AIDS for a number of years, but using the tools, the same kinds of tools that we use nowadays in evolutionary biology. And then moved for 1 year to a university position at the University of Cincinnati. But then at that same time, the Smithsonian was interested in pivoting to start to develop a capability in molecular genetics. So I was hired to start the lab at the Museum of Natural History at the same time that labs that Owen and Jesus work in were established at those other units at the National Zoo and at the Tropical Research Institute. So there's enough about me. Let's have some questions.
All right. Well, guys, I mean, for those of you who have tuned in, and we do already have a couple questions, so I'm really grateful to everybody who's sent their questions. We're going to get to lots of questions here. You know, if you are trying to figure out a career in biology or it's especially genetics, guys, I'm somebody that talks a lot about careers, but man, you've got a gold mine here. So, Saba, I don't know if you've got a microphone and we can hear you, but let's see. Saba, are you there? You might be muted. Yeah, Saba, are you there?
I'm not sure if you hear me, but I'm here.
We can hear you fine. Go ahead with your question if you would, please.
Okay, I was hoping that you would read it, but now I have to go back to it. Okay, I can introduce myself a little bit.
Well, if you would, give us your question, if you would.
Okay. Okay.
You're okay. Go ahead and ask your question if you would, Saba. You're fine. Did we lose you, Saba?
No, I'm here. I just need 1 second to open the file.
You open the file. You're okay. You're gonna read it to us. You're fine. You know what, Saba? I'm gonna come right back to you. Okay.
Okay.
I promise. You stay right there. You got it? Whoop.
Yes, I'm here.
You're here. Go for it, Saba.
Okay. It's been a while that I was thinking about this question, and I have read the view of the speakers, and I thought they may know the direction. If enough humans intend to fly and practice it, after how many generations we could achieve a human genome, I don't know if it's a good term, that can actually fly? of course, I'm not looking for a number. I just want to know the probability of a scenario in which human being intentionally shifts the molecular evolution toward a unique goal.
Wow, that is a cutting edge question. So how many generations would it take to, I guess you're asking to evolve humans to where they could fly? That's a crazy one. Who wants to take that one?
Hey, Zeus is the mammologist.
All right, Jesus, it's all you, man.
I think Owen probably is the most qualified one, because you do study butterflies and you have dealt with the evolution of morphology, wing morphology, and all that stuff. So maybe you put more thought into
What do you think, Owen? Saba, good question.
I'm passing the buck, man.
I mean, so mammals that develop flight, so bats can fly, right? And I think that's happened once, right, Jesus?
Okay, yeah. In terms of true flight, yes. But there's debate about how many times it happened. Yeah.
So the question would be, so evolution, you just don't evolve something because you want to evolve it, right? Natural selection pushes you towards different phenotypic optimum. And then you've got to have genetic variation for natural selection to act upon. So it's a difficult question. My guess is probably never. I think we would probably go extinct before we developed wings. Unfortunately, you need a couple things, right? So evolution is not something that has a plan, right? Natural selection acts on genetic variation to move phenotypes through phenotypic space. So, and it's if there's genetic variation, then you can alter that genetic variation from one generation to the next. So you can move traits. But if there's no genetic variation, then you have to wait for a mutation, and most mutations are bad. And so you'd wait a long time, and I think you would wait too long. I mean, I think humans would go extinct before we evolved wings.
Saba, great question. Thanks for waking us all up. That was a good one. So, Katherine Davis, hopefully you've got a microphone. You might be muted. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
We can sure hear you. Go ahead with your question, if you would, please.
Hi, so I'm a recent college graduate, and I've actually worked in a genetics lab for the last 4 years, and I'm very interested in pursuing a career in conservation genetics. In fact, looking at where all of you work, Dr. McMillan, I want your job.
There's a long line of people that want my job.
So what would be your recommendations in general for recent college graduates looking to get involved in a career in conservation genetics?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really comes down to sort of figuring out what questions interest you. I mean, when I started this conversation, I said, I had an epiphany. I wanted to be a marine biologist, which was at least a step in a particular direction. So that, you want to be a conservation geneticist or conservation biologist. So that, in my mind, sort of sets in motion a series of things that you can do. One important thing to do is find out who's doing things that interest you, and then start a conversation with them. I mean, I talk to lots of young people, and my first advice is, look, if someone's doing something you just find absolutely out of this world, email them. And then when they don't write you back because people get busy and they get tons of emails, email them again. And I think that's, the important thing is, just continue to try to sort of set up a conversation. And then once you have those conversations going, opportunities should start to arise. I know the Smithsonian has an internship program, STRI has an internship program. And so that would be a sort of a way into it, to get your feet wet. I mean, you've been in a lab for a while, so you know exactly what sort of laboratory science is like. What the nuts and bolts of conservation genetics are. I think you can get some flavor by talking to people and then doing more internships. And ultimately, I think if you want to sort of pursue an academic career, then you'd have to go on to get a master's or a PhD. And then, from there, decide whether you want to be an academic scientist like Jesus, like Mike, like myself, or whether there are, what other opportunities there are for trained geneticists. And I think those opportunities there's a fair number out there in terms of sort of non-academic careers. So you just have to start looking. But the first thing is make a decision, and then look around who's doing things that doing things that are interesting for that you think are interesting, and then start making contact, start the conversation. Start now. I mean, right now is a great time to start because everyone is, homebound to a large extent. Just
Type it in email. Yeah.
Yeah, Mike, what do you think? What do you think, Mike? Anything more to add?
Well, I'll add a couple things, but I think Jesus should comment too, because he is a conservation geneticist, dyed in the wool. But I will say I have a few projects that are very conservation oriented on endangered species of birds. What I would say to Katherine, though, at this stage, you probably are inspired by conservation. Most people at your age are. They're especially what I'm hearing a lot from applicants, people interested in graduate school and careers, is I want my career to mean something, to have some application. And people often that ends up being, that gets articulated in terms of conservation, or another route that biology students often are taking is medical school. But what I would say is keep your options open a bit until you've had a chance to explore conservation genetics and the related fields. Because what happens to a lot of people is they do get canalized early, for example, applying to medical school, and not realizing that actually being an MD is not the same thing as being a scientist for most MDs. There are many MDs who also are scientists, but many MDs are not. But conservation genetics and genomics is a big field, it's a growing field, and it's a very important field. So I think Jesus should make a comment or two on it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to echo what both of you said. I mean, finding your passion and becoming involved and finding the right mentor is crucial, I think. Getting into a lab and doing internships or postbacks or some type of work that will allow you to get your feet wet, get experience, and gauge where you want to go. Like Mike mentioned, I mean, I've had many interns, and some of them don't stay in the field of conservation genomics, and they go into a medical field or some other STEM field, but at least they use that opportunity to learn that maybe this wasn't what they wanted to do, or maybe this is what you want to do, but you need to get in there and find your passion and the research that you want to do.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. I mean, this career is not easy, right? I mean, we have all been very, very fortunate, but I think finding your passion is absolutely essential. And then being remarkably tenacious are the two traits, I think, that are going to allow you to explore and succeed.
Yes.
Awesome. Hey, Katherine, thanks so much for a great question.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you, Katherine. So if it looks like Felicia Gordian had a question. Felicia, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you great. Lay it on us if you would, please.
All right. So I was curious about what the most difficult barrier you would find towards beginning a career in conservation genetics would be, and if you have any advice for overcoming those sorts of barriers.
Great. Hey, Zeus, what do you think, man? What are some of the barriers out there?
Well, I think Owen already made some mention of this. This is an intense field, and it's very competitive. And I don't mean to discourage anybody, but there is a lot of competition. There's a few jobs in the field, and so the best thing to do is to become better prepared, obviously, by doing internships and getting yourself involved in research, so that then you could arm yourself with the education, the training that you require to be competitive in the field of conservation genetics. Now, it used to be that a few labs and universities did conservation genetics, but now many universities, not just in the United States, but around the world, that do this. So there is also that opportunity that now it's not just a restricted field to a few labs, but I think it's still a competitive field, and you need to get yourself better trained. And one thing I should mention is that as genetics and genomics have evolved, I think Mike made a mention of this, in terms of computational bioinformatic training is primordial for advancing in this field right now. You need to be really not just into, conservation and the natural world, but you also have to have a lot of training in bioinformatics.
Mike, Owen, anything more to add, please?
Well, one thing I can add is, as Jesus was alluding to, there's a lot of ways that you can have impact in conservation. And genetics and genomics is integral to many conservation projects. But actually, some of the hard work and is carried out on the ground. So I almost by chance, I got involved in a project that is involving trying to recover an endangered species of bird in northern South America. And that we intend to reintroduce the bird in its native range from which it's been extirpated. And that's going to be a demanding part of the job too. So we're using the genetic data to inform what we're doing, but the nuts and bolts, the nitty gritty is going to happen on the ground. So getting into the field and staying open to what really motivates you, as Owen was saying, but then where your talents are and how you can really contribute the best. Some people are great with computers and math, and that's really integral to this field. Some people would rather be out in the woods, and then maybe you should be out there in the woods working with endangered species or conserving an ecosystem. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, just to follow on quickly on Mike's message. I mean, I think Jesus and Mike have hit upon an important point that I think would be nice to sort of bounce out, and that's just, you're really, as a conservation geneticist, geneticist, whatever you want to call us, you have to have a variety of different skill sets. And, particularly, I would imagine, as Mike pointed out, in conservation genetics, I mean, there is lots of issues that involve having a successful project. If it's, recovering a bird species, so there's lots of politics, there's lots of, there's the genetic data that you have to analyze, there's the writing of it, there's the, there's getting the message out, not just to your scientific peers, but also to the public, which I think is an incredibly important part of science these days, and something that scientists need to get better at. So there really is a huge number of skills that you have to be pretty good at to excel at this, at this field. So one of the impediments are, it's hard all the way through. Like I said, I think you have to just believe in yourself and keep pushing, and recognize that you're going to have to develop talents you didn't know you had.
One way of thinking about it, that this is a Korean postdoc once said to me. He said, Mike, people do this kind of science not because they want to, but because they have to. They're so driven to work on these kinds of questions that they persevere in the face of, as we mentioned, it's a pretty competitive field. So.
Yeah, but I should add that what Owen said was about having the passion is really important, because as he mentioned, there will be a lot of challenges, and the pursuing a PhD, for example, can take a lot of effort, and if you don't have the passion and you're in the PhD program, it'll test you.
ABD, baby. Anyway, David Molek, it sounds like you had a question. If you would, lay it on us, please.
Yes, hello. I'm a PhD candidate that plays the genomic data scientist role in Mike Frender's lab. My question is, efforts like the 2019 Heliconius science paper that Owen's on are extremely important to moving evolutionary science forward. Can you speak to how you interact with your co-authors and collaborators, how you manage those relationships, and if ideas come from those relationships, or if you just more use them to vet ideas?
Thanks, Dave. Great question. Owen, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a paper that took 8 years to get published, right? Just to show you the amount of effort that goes. So this was a paper that was published in Science. It was on 22 Heliconius butterfly genomes and sort of comparative analysis of that. And, it started with a conversation at, we get together as a group, once or twice, every other year. We got together at a meeting, again, 8 years ago, we went over, this was at Harvard, went over to the Broad Institute and started talking with a lot of the genomic scientists there to sort of think about ways that we could generate genomes pretty cheaply and sort of put this, so these butterflies that I work on are these charismatic, very brightly colored South American species that have radiated really rapidly in the last 10 million years. So we wanted to put that radiation into a genomic context and start to ask questions about, what generated, how these things radiated. So that was a general backdrop. Yeah, and it took a long time. It took a lot of ideas. Like any paper, it all comes down to what there's so much data in these things. What's actually going to be the most exciting result from that particular type of analysis. And it required some very, very smart people taking a look at the data, and it had to mature and saying, okay, here's what we think is the way that we're going to sort of write this paper and frame it. And a lot of that was done. I mean, there's a lot of authors on this, and the person who did the most is the PhD student at Harvard, Nate Edelman, and the second author is Paul Franson, who's now at BYU. I mean, those guys really sort of pushed a very large, complicated data set through, across the goal line in this case. So yeah, ideas were exchanged, but at the end of the day, it was sort of grit that got the thing out. So I can't underemphasize the importance of grit. In this case, nothing would have been, we probably would have eventually got something out, but it was really those two people, focused effort to get it over the goal line. And a lot of other authors played a role in sort of percolating the idea, but really it was one or two people that I think, that the credit deserves most of the credit for that. And I think lots of the big papers I've been on, there's a lot of ideas that come out, sort of a soup of ideas that come out early in the collaboration. And then throughout the collaboration, these sort of ideas percolate up and down. But at the end of the day, it's really sort of a core group of scientists that take the data and then get the message out. So awesome. I don't know if I answered your question, but these collaborations are, one of the things I always liked about science, and this is one of the reasons why I chose the field in it. I like collaborating with people. I think people have different ideas, and for me, that's the fun bit, right? Where people have a different way of looking at something. And so I have been collaborating for the last 30 years, and I enjoy it. And I think that makes the scientific method much, much, much richer. So.
It's like what you were saying about you got to have a broad skill set. So guys, we're almost out of time, but I want to take one last question from Jamie Felix. Jamie, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go for it, Jamie. Lay it on us if you would, please.
So I am really interested in zoo research and the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute in particular. And I'm currently a postdoc, and I'm hoping to maybe get more into that zoo research field. So is the best way to find an opportunity either with the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute or other zoo fields with conservation genetics and so on and so forth? Is the best way to do that through the Office of Fellowships and Internships, or are there other places where you might list opportunities for future scientists?
So guys, what do you think? What is the secret to getting in? What do you think? Mike, what do you think?
Well, you may have found that we have a number of fellowship programs that some that will be very specific to the Conservation Biology Institute, others that are across the institution. But in a number of those, you can propose your own project. So the right way for a person at your stage is to think about the things that you're interested in, kind of explore these different labs and all of our biology units, the 3 of them represented here. We also have the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center in Edgewater, Maryland, and look at the scientists that are there and the kinds of things that they're doing. So the lab that Jesus works in and the unit that he works in, it's very focused on a lot of conservation things going on. But in our other units, there are a lot of conservation related things going on as well. And so do some surfing of the research scientists and what their interests are, and then go ahead and reach out, talk to people, and you know, even if you reach out to Jesus or one of his colleagues, they might, after talking with you a little bit or on email, might suggest someone else. They might say, you know, that's something that Owen or one of his colleagues in Panama is really interested in, and so they might put you together with the person. Then at your stage, you should be at the stage of starting to propose your own projects in collaboration with a lab that can sponsor them.
Absolutely. Hey, Zeus, what anything to add? I mean,
no, I echo what Mike says. I think it's very important that you get in touch with, well, that you survey the SCVI website and look at the scientists, but in particular, you know, communicate with them directly. I often, you know, get requests from postdocs or from graduate students that want to work in my lab, and that we start a conversation, and like if Mike says that's not something I'm interested in, or if that's something that we could work on, and then we work together on the ideas, and I often recommend that they apply for fellowships, or there may be funding available in our programs where we may need somebody with your talents, and that we could offer a fellowship, not directly through a fellowship program, but it has to go through fellowship programs ultimately.
No, that's right. Owen, anything more to add?
No, I mean, I start the conversation. I mean, that's where it begins. And again, if you don't get an automatic response from someone, they don't write you back right away, well, email them again. I mean, a lot of it, and I tell everyone this. I mean, a lot of times people aren't responding not because they don't care, it's just because something else happened. Yeah. So you know, if after 10 or 20 times, you know, then maybe you should move on. But
yeah, no, that's guys, that's such good advice. Well, for all of you who've joined us, and there's been so many, and sorry to those of you who we couldn't get to your questions, but you know, I think a lot about mentorship, in you know, it's something I think a lot about, and just the mentorship that is represented on this little screen in front of me is just like mind-boggling. The number of people whose careers have been buoyed by these mentors, all three of you, is inestimable. These guys have used a lot of big words. I'm trying to keep up with them. But anyhow, so for those of you who've joined us, if you wanted to find out more, you know, check out the Smithsonian website. Check out some of the recommendations our distinguished panelists have made. And to our distinguished doctor panelists, thank you so much, guys. It's been one of my favorite ones. For those of you who have joined us, I hope this has been one of your favorite ones too. Again, my name is Eric Woodard, Director of Fellowships and Internships at the Smithsonian. And on behalf of the Smithsonian Institution, thank you so much for joining us. We'll have this up as a replay on the website and on YouTube. So if you want to go back and catch something you missed, you'll be able to. In the meantime, thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you. And I encourage anyone to email me as well.
There you go.
All right. Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye.